Rules, be nice, all right? Friendly and nice. We got beat up enough today, so let's all be nice. All right.
I'm
Mayor,
all about it. I'm all about
the
it.
podium is yours.
Thank you, sir.
And make sure you turn your phones off, please.
Somebody's computer, I think, is going a little crazy. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. Today I'm here to not only share important updates from today's City Council, but also to introduce our newest Alderwoman, Alderwoman Monique Scott. And joining me today is, aside from Alderwoman Scott, is the Department of Transportation Commissioner Gia Biaggi, as well as our Building Commissioner, Matt Baudet. I also want to acknowledge the members of the 24th Ward Selection Committee and thank you very much for your support and your commitment to service for our city. Joining us are Brenda Palms-Barber. Thank you so much for being here, as well as Marcus Betts. We appreciate you. Earlier today, a substitute ordinance was passed that will help modernize our city's heating and cooling ordinance and better account for extreme hot weather events. As such events become more and more frequent, and I think this is top of mind for us this week since we hit a couple of very, very warm days. Our construction codes must allow for flexibility in cooling and heating systems to protect the residents who live and work within them. That's why this ordinance will ensure that all senior buildings for those aged 55 and up will be required to have indoor common areas with cooling and dehumidification systems capable of being operated independently from the heating system. And will also require that all apartment buildings and hotels taller than 80 feet or with over 100 dwelling units have indoor common areas with the same kind of cooling systems. Furthermore, permanent air conditioning will be required in all newly constructed daycares, pre-K through 12 schools, and residential building projects. And cooling and dehumidification systems will be required to operate within the heat when the heat index exceeds 80 degrees. Overall, this ordinance will help ensure that no matter the weather, all of our residents, no matter where they live, have access to temperature-controlled spaces. I want to thank Alderwoman Haddon and Commissioner Baudet and their teams for working together on this important initiative, which serves to further protect the health and well-being of our residents in needs. I also just want to say, fundamentally, we can change the rules, and we have. We can update our ordinances, and we have. But we also expect landlords and property managers to exercise common sense. When you see the weather going up, you have a responsibility to go into your buildings and check and see what the temperature is in the common areas, talk to residents, and have on-site staff to make sure that they are being responsive to residents' need. We should never ever have a circumstance where someone is living in a multi-unit dwelling where they are suffering from heat or cold because the landlords haven't stepped up and done what they need to do. We've got to do better in the city. These changes to the heating and cooling ordinance will help, but common sense has got to be the rule of the day. And I'm grateful that the City Council passed this measure. I also want to speak to our city's continued commitment and focus on public safety. As many of you know, an ordinance went through the Finance Committee yesterday that would have allowed increased speeds near schools and parks citywide. This dangerous ordinance comes at a time when we've seen a 15% increase in traffic fatalities over 2 years, including 173 deaths in 2021 alone. It also ignores the fact that speed is a central factor in traffic deaths. As Commissioner Biaggi has been doing, I think, a yeoman's job in explaining and will expound on shortly, a few miles an hour can mean the difference between life and death, quite literally. As speed limits and speeds increase, so do fatalities. And let me give you one example. A person hit by a car traveling at 35 miles per hour is 5 times more likely to die than a person hit by a car traveling at 20 miles per hour. On top of this, the risk of death at every speed is higher for older pedestrians and pedestrians hit by trucks and other large vehicles. And unfortunately, we have a body of growing evidence that underscores this data. Coupled with our unprecedented investment in infrastructure through Chicago Works capital plan, the traffic safety camera program is one of the ways that we prevent these tragedies. And the fact of the matter is, it is working. In 2021, CDOT commissioned an independent study from UIC, that's the University of Illinois, Chicago, and found that automated speed enforcement reduced fatal serious crashes by 15%. The study also found that just as Black, Latinx, and low-income residents suffer from a disproportionate share of traffic violence, they are subjected to higher fines and fees relative to their income. As a response to this finding, in April of 2022, the city launched the Clear Path Relief and Fix-It Defense Program, a set of comprehensive fines and fees reforms offering motorists a path to a debt relief, coupling and building upon our fines and fees work that we started at the beginning of our administration. Under the Clear Path Relief Program, qualifying residents whose income falls below 300% of the federal poverty line will be able to participate in several debt relief options, allowing them to pay a ticket that is proportionate to their income, have additional time to pay off their debt, or receive debt forgiveness entirely. In addition, everyone can claim a fix-it defense for one inspired city sticker violation and expired license plate violations per license, all the way up until the Clear Path program ends on December 31, 2023. It's truly, and I can't say this with enough passion and strongly enough, it's truly unconscionable that any city council member would even consider voting to allow increased speeds, let alone near spaces utilized by our children, and notably parks and schools. I want to thank those members of the city council who understood this and voted no, and because we've got to have responsibility to make sure that we're protecting residents all over our city. I also want to thank the safe passage workers who are with us here today. And I want to also call out the crossing guards as well. Not only are the revenues by state law used to help support these workers, but they are on the front lines every single day. You are seeing the challenges that our residents are facing and that you are personally facing when people are driving with excessive speeds. And that's simply not something that's acceptable. So not only do we need to protect these workers and the work that they do, we need to make sure that we don't take any steps back in funding our police, funding infrastructure around parks, funding after-school programs, or funding our safe passage workers who play such an essential role in public safety. Last but certainly not least, I have the great pleasure of introducing our new 24th Ward Alderwoman, Monique Scott. Monique Scott is a daughter of the West Side. North Lawndale has been her home her entire life. And throughout her extensive, more than 3 decades long career, she has dedicated her time and talents to serve the public. Before assuming this role as Alderwoman, she worked as a park supervisor at the Chicago Park District, where she prepared and monitored an annual budget of $2 million, tripled the number of park memberships and participants in fiscal 2020 alone, and prepared and executed annual operating plans for membership, educational, and other recreational activities, and more. Prior to becoming a park supervisor, Alderwoman Scott dedicated 14 years of her career to the North Lawndale Christian Health Center, where she worked as a healthcare consultant and helped to protect the health and well-being of members of the Lawndale community. In every single one of her public service roles, Alderwoman Scott has put her heart and soul into serving the community. I've said this before, that in thinking about this vacancy, the things that were most important to me were making sure that we were going to be selecting somebody who lived in the community and was of the community and for the community. The other thing that was important to me was making sure that the progress has been made, the resources and the economic opportunity, those corridors of opportunity that have been opened up over the last couple of years, that work continues and gets scaled up. And I wanted to make sure that we had somebody who understood the necessity of that. And that person, unequivocally, was Alderwoman Scott. So I am grateful for her. I'm grateful for her service. I look forward to working with her in partnership to fulfill the vision that she has for bringing more health, more prosperity, more opportunity to North Lawndale. And with that, I'd like to thank her again. You'll hear from her in a moment. But first up, let me welcome Commissioner Matt Baudet. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Matt Baudet, Building Commissioner, and I'd like to thank the Mayor for her leadership on this item, as well as Alderwoman Haddon and Alderman Osterman and other members of the committee that worked very hard on this ordinance. As the Mayor mentioned, common sense must prevail. And just to be clear, the heating ordinance has never prohibited anybody from disengaging the heating system and engaging the cooling system before June 1st. But as the Alderman says, as the Mayor said, we have to exercise common sense in this, and this ordinance does just that. We don't have to have the excuse anymore of you can only have heat or you can have cooling. We understand the limitations of the building systems, but just simply saying, well, sorry, I can't turn the heat on, I can't turn the air on, doesn't cut it. So what this ordinance does, it does a very common sense approach to the solution that we have before us, the issue we have before us of the two-pipe system. So what we've established now is that these buildings need to have cooling centers. And that could be the lounge, it could be the meeting room, it could be the gym. All these buildings have common areas that these folks congregate in. It's very simple to just go out and put some air conditioning units in there. So window units or portable units, just create a cooling center. Don't just simply say, sorry, I can't turn the air on for two days. That doesn't cut it. So what we have is the cooling centers. That's in this ordinance. So effective 10 days from passage today, they'll have to have cooling centers in all these buildings. And they've got 2 years, May 1st, 2024, to make that a permanent system. That gives them plenty of time to obtain the funding, obtain the parts, the labor, whatever they need. They've got 2 years of planning to do this. So I would really like to thank the Mayor for her leadership on this. The building code is often seen as a public safety code or an economic development code, which it is. But under this Mayor's leadership, this code is now an equity code. This code now looks to not just at the buildings, but the people that inhabit those buildings. And Mayor, I thank you for that, because that's, personally, that makes my job worth coming every day, so I could go and actually help people. And Mayor, I thank you for that. And thank you again. Thanks.
Who's next? Next up is Commissioner Biaggi.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you all for being here today and watching as we try to apply common sense to what we can do, everything we can do, all hands on deck to address a crisis that is not only in Chicago, it's across the country in cities. But here in Chicago, we can do something about it. We are doing everything that we can, from lobbying the federal government on the design of cars that are bigger than ever, that if they can't even see a child through the windshield. We are investing $20 million a year over 5 years. That's a $100 million in a dedicated fund to changing the design of our streets. 4,000 miles of streets we are taking it on. And with this mayor's leadership, we have funding for it. We didn't have funding for this before, dedicated to this effort. The third piece that we need help with is making sure that dangerous driving behavior is curbed. People are driving fast, they're driving furious, they're driving distracted. You've all seen it. We've all seen this across our city. And I want to thank the aldermen who see it too, who voted no on this proposed ordinance change. The fact is, when you look at this chart behind me, you can see the consequences of speeding. Speed kills, and speeding is the #1 driver that we're trying to address here. And the hardest thing is to address behavior, right? We all get behind the wheel from time to time, and it's easy to speed, but we have to do everything we can. And the tool in the toolbox to address enforcement of driver behavior is the speed cameras and placing limits, a threshold for getting that speed ticket. So you can see behind me on this graph the influence of the speed camera program. Since we've installed the cameras, you heard we had a study done for 3 years that showed it's making a difference. We're reducing fatalities by double-digit percentages, reducing injuries. Possibly 36 people who would have been killed or seriously injured were not because the cameras were in place. The slide you see behind me is the cameras with the speed thresholds, and injuries near those cameras have gone down. They have gone down 13%. That is a huge improvement. It shows that it's working, and in every camera in the city, we can see that speeds are going down. That is a good thing. The consequences for speeding, as you heard the mayor address in her remarks, are stark, and maybe we can flip to the other slide here. You can see, hopefully at the next slide, we have 20 miles an hour. You have a 10% chance of being killed if you're a pedestrian crossing that street. At 30 miles an hour, you're getting to 40% chance of getting killed. At 36, where the threshold is for a speeding ticket, which is above the law, above the speed limit, you're at 50-50. Maybe you survive, maybe you don't. At 40 miles an hour, which raising the threshold back another 10 miles an hour is a tacit approval of 40 miles an hour in this city. And you can see the consequence. That's an 80% chance of being killed if you're a pedestrian and you get hit. And in the city, it's not just pedestrians. It's also cyclists. It's also drivers themselves. 60% of the fatalities that we saw last year were the drivers. This is for everybody. We need everybody to slow down, but we need tools like the speed cameras and a threshold that makes sense in order to get everybody just to slow down. We want you to slow down. That's what this is about, because you're going to save somebody's life. So the next time you get in the car, think about that. And to everyone who did not support this, I urge you to please look at the data, look at what we're trying to achieve here, look at what's happening in our city and other cities around the country. This is what we can do together. Everyone has a role to play. So I want to thank the mayor for her leadership on this. You heard Commissioner Baudet talk about common sense with heating and cooling. This is common sense when it comes to safety in our city, and we are all about it. And this mayor is all about that. So again, I urge you to take a close look at the data we're presenting. And you know you're experiencing it. You know when you drive around the city that it's real. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk a little bit about that. And again, thank you, Mayor, for your leadership on this critical matter for us as a city, something we can do together. Thank you. And next, I think...
guess he wasn't listening to me.
Somebody around the corner.
So, with a phone. So next, if I may introduce the new 24th Ward Alderman, Monique Scott. Welcome.
First off, I would like to start off and thank the 24th Ward Committee and also the mayor for this appointment. It is an honor to appear in front of you today as the new 24th Ward Alderman. I am here to unequivocally state my commitment and desire to serve the residents of the 24th Ward. North Lawndale has been my home for my entire life. I have lived on the same street since I was 13 years old. It's a neighborhood of hardworking, compassionate people who deserve nothing less than an alderman that will fight for them, an alderman that will fight for them every single day. My passion for this community runs deep. I have spent a large part of my life and career developing relationships in my community. But it didn't just start with me. These relationships were built from the backbone of my parents. My father was the president of the Chicago School Board for many years. He was also the president of the Chicago Park District. Along with those appointments, he held a full-time job and served on many different agencies and boards throughout the city. My mom worked at a high school with an North Lawndale, as well as the 24th Ward Ward Superintendent. Something that always resonated with me as a child. My father always told me, I used to be like, oh, Dad, I want to leave. I don't want to live in this community anymore. I mean, let's go to Lincoln Park. Let's go move someplace else. My father always told me, if you leave, you are part of the problem. But if you stay, then you are part of the solution. So I guess I'm that solution. As both a resident and a public servant, I am proud to have dedicated so much of my time and efforts towards becoming a trusted community resource and bringing residents together to create a community that supports and looks out for everyone. As the mayor mentioned, I've had multiple roles before becoming an alderman. Most recently, I was a supervisor for the Chicago Park District, where I served every day to improve public facilities and manage a team of employees who put residents first. But I know, and I knew, that my work couldn't stop there. That's why I also looked into innovative ways to engage residents and create programming that brought people together. The goal I had then is the same goal that I have now, to create spaces in my neighborhood where my neighbors could feel safe, supported, and seen. North Lawndale is poised to experience a true renaissance thanks to the work of the previous alderman. Now it's my turn to give back. My plan to move my neighborhood forward has three main pillars. First is to continue to improve public safety and build safe spaces in my community. Second, to usher in economic development and investments. And third, to engage our youth to set up our next generation of North Lawndale leaders. My neighbors deserve a leader that has a deep understanding of our community and the resourcefulness to leave no stone unturned. I will bring every ounce of creativity, tenacity, and excellence to this role and continue my family's legacy of public service. It is an honor to step into this role. And during the time when my neighborhood is finally getting the resources we need to live up to our full potential, I am thankful. I will build on this progress as the alderman of the 24th Ward, and I will not waver my commitment to make North Lawndale a better place for all. Thank you. And now I would like to welcome Mayor Lightfoot.
I also want to acknowledge, before I take your questions, Alderman Nick Spazzato. Nick is my friend. My conscience always tells me what he's thinking, and I appreciate his support, knowing and understanding that we've got to do more to keep our community safe. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Thanks a lot, Mayor. Appreciate that. Members of the media, just a couple of reminders. Asha and I will be bringing down the mic to you from the back to the front. Also, if you need to exit the room, you can use the back door. And remember that the Q&A session is to ask a question and not to make a statement. So I appreciate that. And let's kick it off with Mallory from WLS.
Hello, Mayor.
Hi there.
I first wanted to get your reaction to Alderman Anthony Beal's comments after today's City Council meeting where you defer and published his repeal on the ordinance for the speed cameras. He said that the revenue that will be lost, the $45 million, that we could just find it in the same manner that you found revenue in the couch cushions for finding campaign values and finding money towards gas cards. I think that's what he was referring to, but he said you'll find money in the couch cushions for this lost revenue. Is this a public safety issue or is this a revenue issue?
Well, let me quote the alderman himself, and let me take you back a little bit. This changing of the limits from 10 miles an hour to 6 miles an hour was actually passed by the City Council in 2012, so almost a decade ago. And it wasn't enforced during that time for reasons that I think have been lost to the passage of history, but it was approved by a City Council that included yes votes from, for example, Alderman Beal, Alderman Quinn, Alderman Burke, and others. So at the time of the debate, Alderman Beal said, quote, one of the things that you heard from this council is that it's not about the revenue. And we wanted to make sure that it was not about the revenue. And you saw that, so you look to decrease the fine that you would have sent a signal that it is not about the revenue, end quote. So it's a time of passage, something he voted for. He said himself it was not about the revenue. So what's changed in 10 years, other than we have a different mayor? Not much on that front. But what has changed is an incredible acceleration in the amount of speed-related deaths in our city. This is fundamentally about public safety. It's about saving lives. If you've seen the maps that Commissioner Biaggi has shown now over and over again with a number of people who died from traffic fatalities over the course of 2021 alone, and unfortunately we're continuing to see that same pace this year, every part of our city has been affected by this, every single part. Not just the south side, as some have tried to suggest, not just the west side, but downtown, on the northeast side, on the northwest side. This is a crisis for our entire city that we need to tackle, and we are doing that. But the last thing that we need is to give people who are breaking the law by speeding license to go faster, which is what the Beal ordinance would do. And faster, notably, around parks and schools. That makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever. And there's been a lot of discussion about this, but let me also repeat, the revenue is real, but there are ample opportunities for people who get these tickets to get a one pass, to get fines reduced. But fundamentally, the easiest thing for people to do, as Commissioner Biaggi said, is don't speed in the first place. Yeah, no one likes speed cameras, I get it. But this is life or death that we're talking about here. And we have got to step up as a city and address this crisis. When I saw the map that showed the number of fatalities on over 2021, I felt like a gut punch. This is a nationwide crisis. I've spoken to the Secretary of Transportation about this very issue just this last weekend. But here in Chicago, we actually have the tools in our hands to do something about this. This is not one of those big generations in the making, intractable problems that is going to take so much time. All we have to do is take our foot off the gas pedal to preserve lives of pedestrians of all ages, to save lives of bicyclists of all ages, to save lives of other people traveling in vehicles, and even your own life. People are driving too fast. That's fundamentally what this is about. And we've got to spend the time, and we will, to educate the public about what the truth is, because there's a whole lot of nonsense that's been spewed, frankly, over the course of this last week. I felt like I was listening to Donald Trump talk. Some of the things that I heard coming out of members of the body. But the truth is, and the data is, that this is a crisis that needs to be addressed because we are losing Chicagoans, seems like every other day, needlessly because of speeding drivers. That cannot be an acceptable status quo for anyone, and it certainly isn't for me.
The Chicago Bears they put out their training camp schedule today. Do you have an update at all about the progress that's been made on the Bears front, getting them back to Chicago and keeping them out of Arlington Heights?
Well, I'll say two things about that. First of all, let's hope that they have a great season. I think that's what every Chicago Bears fan, including this one, is rooting for. We need our folks healthy. We need an offensive line that projects Justin Field, and we need to make sure that our defense doesn't lose any steps whatsoever. So I think for me, when I think about the Bears, what I think about is let's go get them and be the monsters of the Midway and the performance on the field. That's the most important thing. Regarding your other question, we'll have an update soon.
Thanks, Mayor. Craig Wall, ABC.
Mayor, obviously you've spoken to the underlying issue of the speed cameras, but could you address the tit-for-tat retaliation that seemed to happen today after your deferment process? I mean, you called it games, let the games begin, I thought we heard you say, but, I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, frankly, I don't really have much to say about it. I think the performance of those two who have shown themselves for quite some time really speaks for itself. But I think with the rest of the council, if you read the room, as I did, they want to be about the people's business. And what they don't want is gamesmanship and obstruction, which has become, unfortunately, very, very common fare for those two individuals. What we've got to be about is doing the people's business and acting like adults and getting work done, because that's what people elected us to do. So I'm going to keep focused on doing my job and hopefully moving the city council forward in a way that actually reflects the realities of what people want us to do, which is to serve them, not petty selfish interest.
Bill, essentially saying it was gamesmanship on your part, and questioned, why not just let this come to the full city council for a vote today?
So you hear a lot of things from him, and I've heard a lot of things from him over the course of this last week in particular, and things that frankly have no bearing on the truth. The fact of the matter is we use a procedure, and we're going to move forward. We're going to spend time making sure that we continue to drive home to residents the dangers of the ordinance that he proposed. And I don't want to see a single additional life loss to speeding. And we've got to make that case apparent to the public, because frankly, there was a whole lot of stuff that was said that simply isn't correct. And this administration, we believe in the facts, we believe in the data, and we believe in the science, and we're going to continue to make sure we emphasize that to the residents of the city and urge them to contact their alderman, because this is truly an issue of life or death. We also can't be in a situation where we're not supporting our police department by taking away funding. We can't be in a position where we're not supporting infrastructure around parks and schools. We don't want to be in a position where we're not supporting needed, vital after-school programs. And the last thing that we don't want to be in a position to do is take away funding for the safe passage workers, who are our eyes and ears in the neighborhoods and are providing incredible support for our students and their families at a critical time in these children's development. So we've got to get out there and make sure that we continue to make the case, and I'm confident that we will defeat any efforts to increase speeds around schools and parks. It's just absurd.
Justin Lawrence.
Hey, Mayor.
Hi there.
So you're describing a speeding crisis in the city. Obviously, Commissioner Biaggi has given out the data. I can't quite see the one behind you now, but the people are exponentially greater, have a greater chance of survival at crashes at lower speeds. But the default speed limit in the city is still 30 miles per hour. In New York, it's 25. You're describing all the tools that you have to lower speeds. Why hasn't that been one that you've moved on in the last 3 years, and is it something you'll consider now?
Give us a minute, will you? Well, in 2020, most people weren't on the road. Because they weren't coming downtown, they weren't going to work, they were working remotely. So we saw a substantial reduction in the amount of traffic on the roads. And when things started to get back to normal in 2021, then is when we saw this escalation. So we're looking at a bundle of things that we're doing. This isn't our initiative. This is a wrong-headed move by Beal, Burke, and Lopez to increase speeds around city schools and parks, which is completely the wrong direction. As you heard from the commissioner, one of the things that we've done through our capital works plan is focus on safe streets. Focus on that. And we're happy, if you don't know it, to get you information about that. We've done a lot to make permanent bike lanes and expand the number that are there, not just with a painted line, but with cement barriers. We're doing bump outs. We're doing pedestrian islands, a number of different things that, frankly, we started doing the minute I came in the door in the summer of 2019. You may remember the number of press conferences we had about that very issue, even before we passed the capital plan. So we are taking a number of steps. The commissioner and I and other members of our senior leadership team are looking at this national crisis and saying, what are the other tools that we can bring to bear to make sure that our city's roads and streets are safer? And so this is something, frankly, that we're fighting to educate people about why it's the absolute wrong thing to do in this time. But it doesn't mean that we're not looking at a number of other opportunities for us to make streets safer. And we will continue to do that.
Sorry, I thought.
Second question.
I thought the commissioner was about to say something, but.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
And in fact, through our Vision Zero planning, which is where we work with communities to understand what safety looks like, really on the block, right? Working with a particular ward or neighborhood like North Lawndale and saying, you know, what does safety look like? What could we do? We have been able to do some speed limit lowering in neighborhoods around the city. So we are looking at that, and under this mayor, we've taken those steps at a block level in the neighborhood scale. It's definitely something we're looking at as a possibility.
And the second question can be for either you or the mayor. Alderman Riley introduced an ordinance today, essentially empowering more city employees, including board superintendents, to issue tickets to people who are parked in a bike lane. It would also empower city residents to snap a picture, send it in, and you know, it would go through a process, but that could start the ticketing process. I know you might not have read the ordinance yet, but kind of broadly, are those the kind of things that you're also looking at to make the bike lanes safer?
Well, look, we're aware of measures that have been taken in other cities to empower ordinary residents on traffic safety issues. But I haven't read the ordinance, so I'm sure I wouldn't do it justice. But as I said, we're looking at what other tools that we can use to make our roads and streets safer. And we're open to all suggestions, whether they're from here or across the country, because we know that we've got to do a lot more. But it starts with educating people to take their foot off the gas and just slow down. Because we can have all the rules in place, we can do all the infrastructure improvements, but if people continue to violate the law by speeding in excess of posted signs, we will have gained very little. So a lot of this has to be a public education about what the consequences are of speeding, and frankly showing the chart that's up here that the exponential increase in the likelihood of a pedestrian being killed if they're struck at higher speeds. So I think that's a really important opportunity for us to take to educate the public about the dangers of excessive speed, the dangers of distracted driving, or the dangers of blowing through red lights. I mean, as this debate has progressed over the course of this week, I'm hearing story after story after story of people who literally had near injury/death experiences because somebody ran through a red light, somebody whipped around a corner too fast. So I think this is a big, important issue for us to tackle as a city, but God forbid, the last thing that we need to do is increase speeds around parks and schools. It's the thought of that as the mother of a school-aged child, and I think other people who are hearing this are going to have the same reaction. Really? We're going to encourage faster speeding around schools and parks? It just doesn't make any sense.
I have a question from a colleague as well, Aaron Gettinger, this is from the Reader. I'm just going to read it. He wishes you happy Pride. And then he says the appointed head of your advisory council on LGBTQ+, the Bridgestone Group's Butch trustee. He says he appears to live in New York, not in Chicago, and it is unclear if other members have been appointed to the council. Will you appoint a full council membership, and what will you task the advisory council to do?
Well, we have a council, and my understanding is that Butch trustee is a resident of Chicago. He may have business that takes him elsewhere, and we have a very active and robust advisory council.
Delmore, WBBM. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. When you issued your statement about this vote in the Finance Committee last night, you listed all the aldermen who voted for it and said people should remember those names.
Yes.
Those names include some people who are consistent allies of yours who, for whatever reasons, and reasons that they explained in the meeting, said they had realistic and serious concerns about the lower threshold. What do you mean for the public to do when they remember those names? Are you talking about people voting against them? What do you want people to do when they see those names and remember them?
I think that one of the most important things that we can do is make sure that the public is informed about the work of the City Council. I hear from residents all the time that they have no sense of what goes on and why things that are important to them. As we talk to the public about issues I think that are very important for them, obviously increasing speeds around parks and schools is top of mind. It's really important that the public is educated and that they understand who is doing what.
Okay, I'm also only going to ask one for me. I'm going to ask one for Fran Spielman. And she's asking why, or if you are okay with a 9.2% property tax increase for the Chicago Public Schools, one that the Civic Federation called tone deaf, and also why CPS should have pulled and did pull the proposal for the Chinatown High School off the table today.
So you get one question. Pick. You just asked me two.
But that's a Fran question.
I know that, and I would say the same thing to her if she was here. So I would say you got to talk to CPS obviously about those issues. I don't set those rules. They deliberate as a body of professionals, and then their board votes. So you've got to ask those questions of that. Obviously,
What are you okay with?
Well, what I would say is you've got to talk to CPS about that. The Near South High School, I think CEO Martinez indicated today that he believed that he needed to take more time to engage with residents about that high school, and I defer to him on that. That makes sense to me. Community engagement is important.
William Kelly.
Thank you. Mayor Lightfoot, the people that I speak with in Chicago every day tell me that they're very frustrated with your lack of a plan to combat violent crime. They tell me that they're very frustrated with your rhetoric that sounds more like you support or sympathize with the
So you may not have heard the admonition at the beginning of this press conference. And frankly,
I haven't spoken as long as...
Hold on, sir. It's specific to you. Ask a question, and I'd be happy to respond. But if you continue to come in here and spout a lot of nonsense and rhetoric, that's not a question, and not acting like a journalist, then I'm not going to have any time for you. You had a whole room of people that you're holding up by not asking a question. And I know you like to film me, and then you like to go on Fox News.
Every other reporter here is filming you.
Yeah, so
I'm not the only reporter filming you.
But what I want you to do is ask a question, sir. Don't give me your right-wing nonsense and spewing of facts that are completely untethered from the reality. Just ask a question. That's all I'm asking you. Ask a question so we can move on.
Well, I'm not the only reporter filming you.
Ask a question.
Right.
What's your question?
The obvious question is simply this. There are numerous violent crimes here in the city of Chicago, right? Last night, a teenager was shot in the head on our beautiful lakefront. People around the city, the state, and not only the country, but around the world.
I'm going to ask you one more time.
Chicago.
I'm going to ask you one more time. Ask a question, or we're moving on, sir.
What do you say to the people around the world who view Chicago under your administration as a no-go zone? What do you say to those people about your lack of seeming sympathy or understanding about the violent crime problem in Chicago?
Thank you, sir, for asking your question. Thank you for finally getting your question. Your assumption in your question couldn't be more wrong. Every single week, multiple times a week, we talk specifically about the things that we're doing to combat violent crime in the short term and in the long term. And I have to tell you, I take great offense at your assumption that somehow I show no empathy. You're not the person who makes the calls to parents who have lost their children. You're not the person who goes into community and listens to victims and survivors of violence who are still in deep pain because of the loss. And when you walk in my shoes, sir, then you might have the ability to say something, but because you don't, and because you hide behind your microphone and your hold on one, sir. Don't interrupt me. Because you don't walk the walk of the talk and the rhetoric. When you do, sir, then you have the right to say something else. But I spend a significant amount of time every single day, focused on doing everything possible, everything within my power to make our city streets, our blocks safe. Now, you may not agree with it, and you clearly don't, and you and I probably don't agree on anything because our worldviews are obviously different. And when you talk about the fact that people across the world say that this is a no-go zone, you clearly don't walk outside in the city of Chicago. You clearly don't see the millions of tourists that are here in Chicago. 30.5 million last year. We'll break that record this year. We're seeing our convention business come rebounding back. We're seeing people booking into 2025, 2026. This is a great, beautiful, global city. And the right-wing characterization of our city as something other than what it is, I categorically reject it, but the proof is there. You walk our streets, you see our beautiful, iconic places of visit. They are filled with residents and tourists alike who stop me and tell me how beautiful our city is and how grateful they are to be in Chicago.
Second question.
My second question, I was born and raised in Chicago. I walk the streets every single day of my life. So I love
sir?
Chicago
Is there
very,
a
very
question,
much.
sir?
The
Is there
last
a
time I
question,
was
sir?
here, you said I sounded stupid. I asked about your response to a mass shooting. There have been 3 or 4 new mass shootings since that time. I asked you to rescind your violent call to arms tweet. Since that time, there was a death threat against a Supreme Court Justice, Brett Kavanaugh, and not to mention all of the violence in the city of Chicago.
No, it's okay. Let him spring together his conspiracy theories. Go ahead.
Well,
But get to
it
the
was
question.
reported on the
But get
news
to-
that
but
Brett
get to
Kavanaugh
the-
had
Get to the question,
a
sir.
death threat. Will you finally, at long last, rescind your violent call to arms tweet?
Sir, again, the facts are the facts. My comment was about rising up in opposition to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And you and the other right-wing nuts can try to characterize it any possible way that you can.
Is that appropriate?
Yeah, it is appropriate. It is appropriate. It is appropriate. The right-wing nut media of which you are a part try to mischaracterize my comments about Roe v. Wade as something other than it was. When you're aligning yourself with the likes of somebody like Lauren Boebert, dear Lord, yeah, thank you, sir. All right,
Moving
let's go
on
to
to
the next
Alice,
question.
the Tribune.
Hi, Mayor. Supporters of the Peace Book plan say you haven't warmed up to the idea previously. How do you feel now about the legislation introduced today, and what are your overall thoughts on the pitch to reallocate 2% of CBD?
I think we have to dig into the details. We've been in frequent conversation with a number of different supporters of the Peace Book. I think there are some things within that we are aligned on, and we'll continue to work in concert with them to see if we can come to some kind of an agreement.
Regarding the near Southside High School, what are your initial thoughts on criticism that it's inequitable because it'll lower enrollment at Phillips and elsewhere, and that CPS doesn't need another high school?
Well, I don't think that that's borne out by the data at all. What I know is that the South Loop is one of the areas of the city that has grown. I think the census data tells us that. What I know is that the elementary schools there are bursting at the seams. One of them is in 3 different buildings because of the increase in population. The folks at Chinatown have been begging for a neighborhood high school for quite some time. And so I think the data and the analysis that definitely shows that there absolutely not only is a great need for a high school, but it won't diminish the population in other nearby schools.
Heather Schoen, WTTW.
Hi, Mayor. Now for the 3rd month, Alderman Michelle Smith's ethics proposal remains stalled. Her office told me that you and she sat down and that you had committed to supporting a revised version of that measure to be directly introduced to her committee next month. Is that accurate? And can you tell me what changes you'd like to see?
Well, first and foremost, it's not 3 months. It just got introduced last month.
It was introduced in April, so it wouldn't be considered until July, so that's 3 months.
I don't recall that. I recall it being introduced last month, but be that as it may, we did sit down, we did talk, and we talked about some amendments, and we're working on those.
Can you tell me specifically what your concerns are?
Well, I didn't say I had concerns. What I said is that we are working on some amendments. And when when that work is done, we'll let you know.
During the Finance Committee debate about the speed camera issue, it was clear that there are no speed cameras in Lincoln Park, and there are very few along the lakefront, according to the map that's on the city's data portal.
That's not accurate, and Commissioner Biaggi can certainly address that issue.
Sure. Thank you. I'm glad you asked, because this is a great opportunity to clear this up. So Lincoln Park has 3 cameras enforcing near Schaefer Park. That's near Ashland, Fullerton, Clybourne, which we know is a very, it's a high crash corridor. We see crashes there every 2 days. So it's not, so there are in Lincoln Park, and they're also in the Gold Coast, in Streeterville, Lakeview, north of Lincoln Park, Uptown, Edgewater, and downtown. And I should add, I suppose that there are no speed cameras near South, Douglas, Oakland, Kenwood, Bronzeville, Grand Boulevard, and Armour Square. So we have an array, obviously, out there, and we're happy to work with any community on making sure that the cameras are where they need to be within the constraints of the rules, which are parks and schools.
Greg Pratt, The Tribune.
Good afternoon, Mayor. So the council passed the officer death benefits ordinance that Matt O'Shea was pushing. And there was some talk, and there is a lot of talk about how tough the job is of a police officer, which is, it's tough at all times. It's been tough now. There's a lot of concern out there that the cops are getting burned out. They're not getting their time off. They don't have enough support. I'm wondering if you can speak to that issue of days off and just just generally what you can do to help the officers who are struggling.
Well, there's a lot baked into your question, and let me try to address them. Look, I've said this multiple times because I believe it. I think this is one of the hardest times to be a police officer. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Every single day, they are seeing people in their worst possible circumstances, and that is real. And the trauma that police officers are experiencing is real, which is precisely why we, at the urging of the superintendent, passed a additional $20 million specific to officer wellness, and we are executing on making sure that there are resources in every police district for our officers that are on duty, and frankly for their families to be able to access. When I took office, there were 3 EAP specialists to service the entire department. We've now increased that number exponentially, and we're going to continue to look at ways in which we can support our officers. I heard a number of things today that were said, and particularly around canceled days off and so forth. What I would urge is people to actually educate themselves about what the realities are. The reality is that for the last 2 years, officers are given notice ahead of time when days are going to be canceled. For example, Memorial Day weekend, Father's Day weekend, 4th of July, Labor Day. Those are given notice from the department ahead of time so that officers and their families can make a preparation. In addition, obviously, there are some times when there may be an emergency and a day often has to be canceled, or because of particular circumstances in a particular geographic area, there may be a reason to hold people over their day, over their tour for a couple of hours. But what I would also say is you should figure out and look at the incredible amount of furlough days, personal days, and other things that officers have by contract. So this notion that, I think the infamous head of the FOP has said as part of his campaign, they're being worked like mules, it's just simply not correct. We understand there's a lot of stress and strain on being a police officer. That part of that is inherent in the job, but we are doing, and I would say the department has taken extraordinary steps to try to ease that burden on individual officers and their families, particularly during what I think, as I said before, is probably the most difficult time to be the police. So the facts do matter here, and if you look at the amount of respite that is baked into the contracts that officers get as a matter of contractual right, and you couple that with the advance notice that they never used to get Never used to get. I worked in this department back in the early 2000s. Canceled days off just happened, and it'd get maybe 24 hours notice or less. That is not the way this superintendent manages the police department. And so sometimes people get wedded to a narrative, but that narrative is just not correct.
All right, and then on ethics and term limits, Pat Quinn is trying to force mayoral term limits. That's something, and his ordinance came in today. That's something that you did say you supported, and for committee chairmanships, and you haven't moved on that. Are you working to move on that? Are you planning to introduce something? Is that something that? What's the status of you doing something about that?
Well, what I said is, and I've been on record on this way before I ran for mayor, I believe in term limits, and I still do. And we will work with the council, but I think it's something that is a bigger issue than city council, bigger than a mayor. It's something that really needs to be taken on at the state level and across the board. But what I will tell you is, other than Pat Quinn, I'm not hearing a huge hue and cry from residents who are worried about escalating gas prices, worried about grocery prices, worried about whether or not they're going to have a job, how they're going to recover from the pandemic, whether or not they're going to get sick. There's a whole laundry list of things that I hear on a daily basis from residents, and I think my obligation is to be responsive to the needs of our residents, and that's what I'm focused on.
All right, Erin, Daily Eye.
Hi. Can you respond to aldermen who say that the ETOD ordinance goes too far to circumvent existing zoning and could make neighborhoods too dense?
So that's why we introduce things and have discussions. So we'll have those discussions.
Okay. And we're coming up on a year since the Civilian Oversight Commission was approved, and then a month since the list of 14 nominees was sent to you. What's taking so long to make a decision, and when can we expect that commission to be announced?
Well, as you can appreciate, this is going to be, I think, some of the most important appointments that I make. And so I want to make sure that I take my time to understand who these people are and give them an opportunity to come in and have a discussion. Because once these commissioners are set, and obviously I was waiting on City Council to give me the list. I have gotten a list in the last 3 weeks. And I'm going to take the time that's necessary to make sure that we get this right for the residents of our city.
Thanks, Mayor. Mariah, WBZ.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi there.
Today, homeless prevention advocates held a press conference to grade you for your first 3 years on the issue. They gave you a B+ for advancing, quote, Band-Aid solutions to prevent homelessness, an F on creating a annual revenue stream to try to prevent homelessness. One of the issues is the real estate transfer tax. And so my question is, do you support putting a question on the ballot to let voters decide whether the city should increase the real estate transfer tax on properties over $1 million in the city to help fund homeless solutions?
Well, we obviously have been working diligently over these last 3 years to make sure that we're addressing the challenges of homelessness in our city, which, as you know, are very complex. There's a lot of different reasons why people are on the street. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So that's why we've got to have a lot of different voices at the table, making sure that we've got social workers, mental health workers, that we're working on, obviously, transitional housing. And we're doing those things and trying to move forward as fast as possible. And we've committed extraordinary amounts of resources to do just that. Frankly, as you know, I supported the real estate transfer tax early on and tried to get that done in Springfield. But because of the things that were done by the same coalition, that program didn't move forward. So what I will say is I'm going to continue to work on making sure that we've got the resources that we need to address the homelessness challenges that we have that are multi-tiered and complex, and make sure that we have a multidisciplinary approach to getting people off the street. Nobody in our city should be living on the street.
Do you have contingency plans to fill a $45 million hole? You know, we're hearing about the cuts to safe passage programs, to after-school programs if Beal's legislation is passed. For residents who are concerned about those cuts, what are your contingency plans to fill that hole?
I don't intend to ever let that happen.
But if it does?
I don't intend to ever let that happen.
Thank you, Mariah. Thank you, Mayor. That's a wrap, everyone. Have a great day.